Last week, my friends, we honored fathers. Today, I would like us to expand that treatment and today talk about honoring parents. To do that, I have chosen to preach on the fifth commandment, one that is well known, especially to parents. Honor your father and your mother, so that your days may be long in the land which the Lord your God is giving you. This is a favorite commandment of parents because most parents, most people understand that this commandment is directed towards children. And I can tell you that this is the only commandment that I can ever remember my mother quoting to me. She would remind me on more than one occasion that it was written in the Bible that I was supposed to honor my mother. What I want you to know this morning, dearly beloved, is that while parents like the fact that this commandment is directed to children, the fact is this commandment is not directed to children. The fifth commandment is in fact directed to adults, as are all the 10 commandments. So this commandment in particular is written to anyone who has parents. Whether you are young or not so young, anyone who has parents, and that includes every single one of us. I have struggled for a long time to understand and comprehend fully the meaning of the fifth commandment, to honor one's parents. What does honor mean? Does it mean that we're supposed to obey our parents? Does it mean we're supposed to listen to our parents? Are we supposed to love our parents, respect our parents? What does the word honor mean? I want to point out to you that we find the word obey written many times in the Hebrew Scriptures, obey the Lord your God, and we see the word listen occur many times in the Hebrew Scriptures. Here from the book of Proverbs, listen to me and be attentive to the words of my mouth. However, the word honor appears only one time in the Hebrew text, and that is in the fifth commandment, honor your father and mother. Why is the word honor used here? Why isn't the word obey used, or listen used, or mother, or love, or respect? The question for us today, dearly beloved, is what does it mean to honor one's parents? And evidently, I'm not the only one who has struggled with this commandment. I remember a number of years ago, a man came up to me at the church where I was serving, and he said, something you need to know about me, I'm going to tell you right off. Of all the 10 commandments, there's only one I know I cannot obey, and that is the fifth commandment. I had a father who was cold and cruel. He withheld love and affection from me and my siblings and my mother. The more miserable we were, the happier it seemed he was. So I want you to know this about me. I cannot honor my father. I will not honor my father, and I have no intention of honoring my father. I want to point out, brothers and sisters, that this commandment does not come with a condition. It does not say honor your father and your mother if they are honorable. It does not say to honor your parents if they are deserving. It doesn't say to honor your parents if they are blameless. There is no condition. The commandment is straightforward. Honor your father and your mother. I have another friend, a male friend. He's been my friend for many years now, and it was several years into our friendship that he shared with me something that took me completely aback, and I think at the time he told me this story, he thought I already knew it, but in fact, I was hearing it for the first time. He told me that his father had molested his youngest daughter, that sexually molested his youngest daughter. He and his wife knew nothing about it. I won't describe how the truth of it came about, but when the truth came out, my friend was livid as he saw his youngest daughter weep and tell him and his wife the story of what her grandfather had done to her. And then he was shocked again when his oldest daughter started to sob and say the exact same thing had happened to her. That their grandfather had sexually molested both of his granddaughters. The oldest child, a boy, was spared. My friend was an only child. He was just absolutely broken by what had happened to his daughters at the hand of his father. He couldn't believe that he nor his wife had any idea that this had happened. He called a friend who called someone else who knew a therapist who came in that evening, late that night, stayed with the family until the early hours of the morning as they talked about what had happened, tried to figure out a way to deal with what had happened. It was a terrible time in the life of this family. That night, my friend got no sleep. He got up the next morning, called in sick at work, drove to the home of his parents, which was in the state of Pennsylvania, but was several hours away. He walked into his childhood home, and he told his father he knew everything, that his daughters had told them everything that he had done to them. And he said, I want to hear you admit it. Tell me that this is what you did to them. I want to hear the truth from you. And his father said, it never happened. It never happened. Your daughters are lying. They're lying. This never happened. And he said, tell me the truth. And his father said, it never happened. My friend looked at his mother and she said, did you know about this? Did you know about this? And his mother looked at the floor and she wouldn't look at him and she didn't say a word. And he said, you knew. You knew, didn't you? Tell me what you knew. She would not look at him. She looked down at the floor, and after a time of silence, she looked up and she said, I agree with my husband. And my friend said to his parents, okay, that's the way you want to play it? That's the way we will play it. From this day forward, you will never again see your grandchildren. These are the only grandchildren you have or will ever have. You will never again lay eyes on them. When both of his parents died on separate occasions, none of the grandchildren were at those funeral services. As it turned out, my friend's mother died first. His father was left in the home by himself to take care of himself, and after a period of time, it became clear that the man could not take care of himself alone. So my friend drove again to his childhood home. He gave his mother's things away to charity. He packed up his father's clothes. He dispersed of the furniture. He sold the house. He moved his father here to South Central Pennsylvania in a care facility not far from his home. And every Sunday, he took his father to lunch and took him for a Sunday drive. On occasion, his father would show up at church. So when my friend told me what his father had done to his daughters, I said, are you talking about the father that I see in church? And he said, yes. And I said, that's the man that sexually abused your daughters? And he said, yes. And I said, And you take him to lunch every week, and you take him for an hour's drive every Sunday? And he said, yes. And I said, I don't know how you can do that. How can you do that after what he did to your children? And he said to me, I do it because I'm supposed to do it. And in that moment, I realized that this man had a lot to teach me about obeying the fifth commandment. He treated his father honorably, in my opinion. I came across a story as I was trying to understand this commandment that gave it another layer of interpretation for me that I want to share with you now. Between the story of my friend and the way he treated his father after molesting his daughters, his granddaughters, I found another story from an unlikely source. It comes from Grimm's fairy tales. The story goes like this. Once upon a time, there was a little old man whose hands shook and his eyes blinked. He often clattered his silverware, and more often than not, his food ended up on his clothes instead of his mouth. The little old man lived with his son and his daughter-in-law and granddaughter on a small farm. Now, the wife considered herself a modern kind of wife, and she didn't think that in-laws should live with their children. So she didn't like the fact that her father-in-law lived with her. Night after night, she watched her father-in-law's hand shake, and the milk would spill on the table when he picked up the glass, and the food he tried to eat landed on his face or his clothes or the tablecloth. And after a period of time, she said to her husband, I feel like I cannot even sit down at my own dinner table to eat a meal that I have prepared because I have to look at your father. The food he eats runs off his face. It lands on the clothes that I have to wash. The food is on the tablecloth that I have to wash and on the floor that I have to clean. He misses his mouth as much as he hits it with his spoon. It's sickening. It's disgusting. I lose my appetite every single night now that I have to sit at the same table with your husband. It's not with your father. It's not right that I cannot eat a meal at my own dinner table every night of the week. And the husband thought about his wife's words, and he thought, well, maybe she's right. So he took his old father by the arm and he set him on a stool in the corner by himself. And he served him his dinner in an earthenware bowl and a spoon. And the little old man's eyes still blinked and his hands still shook. And he ate his dinner by himself in the corner. One night his hands shook more than usual, and he accidentally dropped the earthenware bowl, which shattered, and food went all over the floor. With this, the wife had had it. She said, "You are a pig. You can't even keep your food in a bowl. If you're going to act like a pig, you should eat like a pig. You should eat in a trough, outside. And she stormed away from the table. Again, her husband thought about the words of his wife and thought again that maybe she was right. So he built a trough outside on the little farm. And that night, his father was served his meal in the wooden trough without utensils, and he ate from the trough like the pigs did. Not long after that, the man was working the farm, and he saw his young daughter running around the farm, playful. He adored his daughter. And then later in the day, he saw that she was doing something quite serious. She was using her little toolbox that he had made her, and she had chips of wood, and she was working intently with her tools and chips of wood. And he went up to his daughter, and he smiled at her, and he said, "What are you making with your tools, young lady?" And she smiled at him with a big smile, and she said, "Daddy, I'm building a trough for you and Mommy to eat out of when you get old." And she looked up at her father for approval. The man looked at his daughter, and he didn't say anything. He went inside the house and told his wife about the conversation he had just had with his daughter. And together they cried. That night, the man's father, the little old man, was sitting at the head of the table in the most comfortable chair that they had. The wife had put on her most expensive tablecloth. This time, the little old man had a plate in front of him. His food was served on a plate. He had silverware, and he had a glass of milk to drink. His hands still shook, and his eyes still blinked. But whenever he spilled something, or clattered something, or missed his mouth, no one said a single word to him about it. No one mocked him. No one made fun of him. No one derided him. From that day onward, the little old man was a welcomed guest at his family's table. My friends, the point of the fifth commandment to me is clear in light of this story. The way we treat our parents is very likely the way our children will treat us. How we treat our parents is very likely the way our children will treat us. Honor your father and your mother so that your children will honor you. The fifth commandment is about how we treat our parents. And it doesn't matter what kind of parents we have. It doesn't matter if we have good parents or not good parents, who they were, what they might have been, what they did, whether or not they ever reached their potential. None of that matters. What matters is how we treat our parents. And it is wonderful if we treat our parents with kindness. Just as in Grimm's fairy tale and the story of my friend and his father. It makes all the difference in the world when we treat our parents with kindness. And I would like to expand this commandment to say, what a wonderful world it would be, brothers and sisters, if we treated not only our parents, but all of God's children with kindness, we would live in a very different world. Many of you know that I worked for over 6 years as the head chaplain at Camp Hill State Prison here in Camp Hill, Pennsylvania. When I arrived at the prison, I heard stories about the prison riots that took place at Camp Hill Prison in October 1989. Even though I arrived years later, stories of those riots were still very much a part of the conversation in that prison, and I heard a lot of different opinions about what the systemic reason was for those riots. And I remember well watching on television fire and smoke coming from Camp Hill Prison on the evening news while those riots took place. Almost every building in that complex was badly burned and or damaged. Every building that is, except for one. Can you guess what one building was not touched during the Camp Hill prison riots? If you guessed the chapel, you guessed correctly. There was no damage done to the chapel. It was unscathed. I hadn't been there long, my friends, for me to understand why I thought that was the case. The reason was because the inmates who came to the chapel, every single one of them, were treated with kindness. More than one inmate told me how different it felt to come to the chapel because he felt like he was treated like he was a human being. We treated people with kindness. We treated inmates as if they were God's children, a real human being. There were 3 Protestant chaplains, 2 Roman Catholic chaplains, one chaplain, one imam for Muslim inmates, a rabbi for Jewish inmates, a Native American inmate for the Native Americans who were in prison there, and many volunteers, and all of us treated all of the inmates the same. We treated them with kindness. It didn't matter what the color of their skin was. It didn't matter what faith tradition they claimed, if they claimed one at all. It didn't matter what crime they had committed. We treated them with kindness and concern and with compassion, and it made all the difference in the world. Can you imagine a place like that? A place where we could go and it doesn't matter what the color of our skin is. It doesn't matter what our faith tradition might be. It doesn't matter what mistakes we made in the past, because one mistake shouldn't have to define a person's entire life. To be treated with absolute kindness? Is it even possible to imagine what kind of world that would be like for us to live in? That would be an almost unimaginable world. But I can tell you that's the environment where I worked for over 6 years, 6 days a week. I had people inside the prison and church members and people on the outside ask me so many times, "Ann, aren't you afraid to be working with those inmates there? There's some really, really mean men there. Murderers, rapists, God knows what. Aren't you afraid?" The truth, dearly beloved, is this: I was not afraid a single time. Never. Because we treated people with kindness. And I did not believe that that would be betrayed or ignored. I believed, in fact, that I was in the safest place in the prison, because that was the one place, the chapel, that was not damaged during the riots. From Monday to Friday, 1,000 inmates came through the chapel. That's out of 3,000 that are there. 1,000 came for worships, studies, the religious library, for counseling. 1,000 inmates. Every Saturday and Sunday, there were 1,000 inmates for Christian worship. And there were so many inmates for the other worship services, the Muslim service, the Jewish service, and the Native American circle. That's a high percentage of that prison population who came to the chapel every week, because we were kind to them. We called them by their name, Mr. We weren't supposed to use anyone's first name, but we called them Mr., whatever their last name was. The Christian chaplains and volunteers called them my brother in Christ. We didn't call them convicts. That's what the COs called them, most of the COs, convicts. I'm out with a felon. Felon number with two letters and 4 numbers. They didn't have names. They were a number. They were convicts. They were felons. They were a human being in the chapel. They had a name. We called them by name. They had a face. We looked at them in their face, and we treated them with kindness. I learned as a chaplain at Camp Hill State Prison that kindness can make all the difference in the world. The chapel was a retreat from the extraordinarily hostile environment in which they lived. It was in the chapel they found hope in a hopeless situation. I was never once afraid of an inmate. I was, however, on more than one occasion, afraid of other personnel who worked at the prison. I was never afraid of an inmate. I learned an important lesson as chaplain at Camp Hill State Prison about kindness. Just a few weeks ago, I was reading a current best-selling book entitled The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse by Charlie McKeesey. Now let me tell you that none of the characters in the book have a name. Their names are the boy, the mole, the fox, and the horse. I was completely captivated by the first 2 pages of the book. The book opens with a boy. He's not a big boy, I would say 6 or 7 years old in the drawing. The mole is tiny, and the tiny mole looks up at his friend the boy like this. Because to him, the boy, even though he's not tall, looks really, really tall to the mole. And so the mole says to the boy, "I'm so small." "Yes," said the boy. And I'm thinking the mole wanted to be more than anything tall. He wanted to grow up to be tall. So he asked his second question to the boy. "What do you want to be when you grow up?" "Kind," said the boy. "What do you want to be when you grow up?" "Kind," said the boy. Through the years, I've had people tell me that they want to grow up to be an inventor or the president of the United States. Or they don't know what they want to grow up to be. They're still figuring that out. And all of those answers are fine answers. But can we imagine what the world would be like if every person we ask What do you want to be when you grow up? Answered, kind. I want to be kind when I grow up. That would be an extraordinary world indeed. Dearly beloved, the fifth commandment is the only commandment that has a promise attached to it. Honor your father and your mother, so that your days may be long in the land which the Lord your God is giving you. In the ancient world, long life referred to physical life. The parents want to live to be an old age. And if children are kind to their parents, there's a good chance they might live to be an old age. But long life means more than that in the ancient world. It means being remembered after they have died, living on in the memories and in the stories of their children and their children's children. In other words, they do not want to be forgotten. If we honor our parents and our children honor us, and their children honor them, and so on throughout the generations, then we can be certain of the promise that God gives in the fifth commandment, that we will live long in the land which the Lord our God is giving to us. Amen.